Hi there, I'm Lauren Kimble, 37, daughter of a tech company's co-founder of one of the most powerful tech companies in the country. When my father died, all I asked for was 3 days to bury him. But Vanessa, my sister-in-law and the acting CEO, called it a disruption, dismissed my grief as defiance, and forced me out of the company my family built. What she didn't know was that my father left a hidden clause in the founding agreement, and when I used it, everything began to unravel. Before I share the full story, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. And thank you for being here. When my father died, I didn't ask for a raise or a break or sympathy. I asked for 3 days, just 3 quiet days to bury the man who built me. But apparently, grief needs to be scheduled now, and I was already behind. I drove straight from the hospice, the sterile tang of antiseptic still clinging to my coat sleeves. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, a sealed envelope resting on the passenger seat. Inside it, my father's eulogy, scribbled in the dark at 3:12 a.m., while his breathing slowed under a plastic mask. The words had come like a tide, gritty, relentless, sacred. I couldn't bring myself to email them. I'd written 1 copy, just 1. I carried it like it mattered. The headquarters of Aria Systems loomed above me, glass, steel, and the ghost of legacy. I used to feel proud walking in. Now the front desk didn't even look up. I climbed to the executive floor, heels clicking on tile that had known my father's footsteps long before they echoed mine. At the center of the floor, encased in glass like a trophy, sat the war room, the boardroom, but everyone called it Vanessa's nest now. She sat there, poised like a queen, flanked by 2 junior VPs with wide eyes and open laptops. Her long nails clicked over a tablet screen, and without missing a beat, she caught my eye through the glass. She didn't wave, didn't rise, just lifted a single polished finger that said, "Wait." I stood, envelope sweating in my hand, watching the 3 of them laugh over some projected slide of market penetration. After 6 minutes, she finally waved me in. Not a word, just a flick of the wrist, like dismissing a waiter. I stepped inside. She didn't look up. "Make it quick," she said, tapping her stylus. "We're up against a hard deadline." I sat, even though she hadn't offered a chair. My mouth tasted metallic from lack of sleep. "Dad passed early this morning," I said. "I need 3 days to settle arrangements, to help my mom." Her eyes flicked briefly up, then dropped back to a bar chart showing green arrows surging northeast. "You're either committed to the Kapara acquisition," she said, "or you're not. Family can wait. The market won't." She said family like it was a weak point, like it was a bad investment. I didn't respond right away. I just laid the envelope gently on the table between us. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't slide it like a movie. I placed it like a weight, like it meant something. She glanced down, nudged it with her nail. It slid off the table, landed face down on the gray carpet. "Then you've made your choice," she said, eyes already back on the next slide. "Safe travels." I bent slowly, picked it up, brushed off some invisible dust. One of the junior VPs offered me a sympathetic half-smile before looking away. Loyalty, I realized, has a hierarchy. I didn't speak again. I just walked out. My reflection moved silently through the glass corridors, like a ghost that hadn't realized it was already dead. But I wasn't dead. Not yet. In the elevator, I clutched the envelope to my chest, like armor. I remembered what Dad once said when I was 12 and came home from school, furious after being left out of a science group. "They see your silence as weakness. Let them. It makes the moment you speak that much louder." At the time, I hadn't understood what he meant. I do now. That night, the house felt cavernous. My mom had gone to bed early, her body too tired for sadness. I sat at the same kitchen table where Dad used to grade my math homework, the envelope still resting beside my elbow. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go. But I answered. A voice came through, rough, older, careful. "Lauren," it said. "It's Marcus Bell, your father's counsel. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I whispered. My voice sounded like it came from someone smaller. "He left something for you," Marcus said. "A provision in the original founder's trust. It's sensitive. He requested you view it privately, away from the board." Silence filled the line for a beat. "He didn't leave everything to them." I sat up. "What is it?" "A clause and a key. You'll want to come by first thing." When I hung up, I stared at the eulogy. I pressed it flat on the table, fingers curled around its edges. Dad had believed in me, enough to set something in motion I hadn't even seen coming. In that moment, for the first time in weeks, I felt something stir beneath the grief. It wasn't peace. It wasn't even hope. It was something sharper, something close to power. And I wasn't about to ignore it. The chapel was small and smelled like old wood polish and extinguished candles, tucked behind a pharmacy off West Seattle's rain-glossed streets. Dad wouldn't have wanted anything grand, just something simple, human. I'd chosen this place because it reminded me of him, modest, worn around the edges, but dignified in a way you could feel in your bones. My mother walked in beside me, scarf pulled tight around her neck, her fingers trembling once where they rested on my elbow. We moved past the first pews like shadows, and for a moment I let myself believe the silence meant reverence. But it didn't. It meant absence. The pews were thin. No one from Aureus came. Not my brother Ethan, not the board, not even a cold bouquet or an automated email. Just a few old friends from Dad's early startup days, our retired neighbor from across the street, and the hospice nurse who had cried harder than some cousins. It didn't hurt exactly. It just hollowed me out a little more, like watching your name fade from a whiteboard, quietly erased while you blinked. When I stepped forward with the eulogy in hand, the envelope felt heavier than it had the day before. My voice held steady, not because I was brave, but because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crack. I spoke of Dad's love for ideas, his tendency to pause before answering, and how he once told me, "Silence is generous, but don't ever let it be permission." That line lodged in my throat. I got through it, just barely. Then I folded the paper and stepped away like I was walking off a cliff edge I hadn't seen coming. After the service, I lingered, rearranged lilies that were already starting to wilt in the cold air. A board member's wife stood near the vestibule in pearls and muted judgment, speaking just loudly enough to be overheard. "Vanessa says Lauren's stepping back from Aureus," she murmured, sliding sunglasses into her bag. "Honestly, maybe it's for the best." The way she said it, like discussing a guest room remodel, lit a small cold fire behind my ribs. I wasn't stepping back. I'd been shoved. That night the house felt impossibly still, like it was waiting for something that wasn't coming. Mom had gone to bed early. Grief took a different shape in her, quieter, rounder, like she was trying not to disturb the space Dad had left behind. I sat at the kitchen table, envelope resting beside a cooling mug of untouched tea. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Bell lit the screen. "See attached. Your father's handwritten note regarding Clause 6.4.2. Original copy in firm vault." The PDF opened slow. My heart opened faster. Parkar. The clause was there, clean. Dated 5 years ago, just after Dad's second stroke. Highlighted in yellow, "If any direct descendant of the founding members is denied reasonable bereavement leave, full executive voting privileges transfer to the minority stakeholder among direct heirs, pending an ethics review." A failsafe, a hidden switch buried beneath the floorboards of power. Everyone had assumed Dad stopped caring about governance when he got sick. But he hadn't. He'd just stopped talking to them about it. Morning broke gray across Puget Sound. I slid the ring of brass keys into my coat pocket and left the house before Mom stirred. The address Marcus had given me led to a nondescript storage facility off an industrial strip in Tacoma. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The clerk barely looked up as he waved me down the hall. Unit 23 waited with its steel door cracked just slightly, like it had been expecting me all along. Inside, a folding table, 2 dusty file cabinets, and a leather briefcase bearing a faded tag, Aureus Founding Agreement, 1998. I opened it with both hands, like a vault. Inside were folders filled with Dad's handwriting, printed addenda, and one envelope addressed simply, "For Lauren, in trust." I opened the first folder and found the clause again. Only this time, stamped, notarized, and binding. Beneath it, a second revision dated 18 months ago. Dad had reinforced the trigger. He knew the board wouldn't protect me, so he wrote protection into the foundation. I stood there in that metal room with the hum of old pipes overhead, and for the first time since he passed, I felt something shift. Not closure, not relief. Something closer to gravity, something anchoring. I had thought the funeral was the end, but it was just the ignition point. The clause wasn't a loophole, it was a door. And Dad hadn't asked me to knock. He'd given me the key. It's funny how paper can feel heavier than metal. I carried that clause like it might burn through my coat pocket. Like someone might stop me on the street and ask me to prove why I mattered. But no one did. The city moved on, as it always does. Unaware, uninterested. Meanwhile, I drove north from Tacoma with the briefcase in the passenger seat, and 100 thoughts bumping into each other like loose change in my head. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I knew who to call. Marcus met me in his office just before noon. The space hadn't changed in 20 years. Same leather-bound volumes behind glass. Same oak desk with the scuffed corner. Same faint scent of lemon oil and resolve. He didn't offer condolences this time, just motioned for me to sit and pulled the folder from the case like it was sacred. He read silently, pen tapping, brow furrowed. "It's clear," he said finally, sliding the clause toward me. "If we file under this provision, you freeze the board. Temporarily, yes, but enough to force an audit, enough to make noise." He paused. "They'll fight back, Vanessa especially." I nodded. "Let them." The engagement letter was 1 page. No fanfare. I signed it with Dad's favorite fountain pen, the one I found still full of ink in his desk drawer. Marcus scanned and filed the motion through the corporate portal, while I watched the progress bar crawl like it knew the weight of what it carried. When it finished, a simple confirmation appeared at the bottom of the screen. "Submission accepted. State Business Registry." No fireworks, just a blue stamp and a beep. But it felt like thunder. Traffic on the way back crawled through construction and early afternoon rain. The city blurred past me, glass towers and billboard promises and lives I wasn't living. I thought about Ethan, about where he might be. Probably in Vanessa's office, nodding along while she spun the next quarter's narrative. He used to call me the soul of the company. Now I was just a line they'd redacted. At a red light, I composed a 1-line email. No subject, no greeting. Just, per clause 6.4.2 of the Aureus Founding Agreement, all executive actions are hereby suspended, pending formal review. I stared at the words for a long time before hitting send. The light turned green as the message left my outbox. By the time I got home, the rain had let up, but the quiet hadn't. Mom was out back trimming the rosemary bush, like it was something she could still control. I didn't tell her what I'd done. Not yet. Instead, I made tea. Sat at Dad's desk, opened the folder again. There was a second envelope tucked behind the first. Thinner, more fragile. It was addressed in Dad's hand. "In the event they forget who you are." I opened it slowly, like peeling back skin. Inside was a note. Just a few lines, no signature. "They'll tell you legacy is earned, that it lives in buildings and stocks and headlines. It doesn't. Legacy is who you choose to protect when no one's watching. That's what they'll never understand. That's why you'll win." There were no instructions, just that. And beneath it, an old photo of the first Aureus prototype, a crude motherboard with his handwriting labeling each connection. Built in our garage, the note on the back read, "By two fools in a dream, don't let them call it theirs." I stared at that photo for a long time, not because I missed him more, but because I finally understood what he'd meant all those years ago when he said quiet power lasts longer. He didn't need to scream to be heard. He just needed someone willing to keep listening after he was gone. The next morning, my inbox confirmed Vanessa had read my email at 5:12 p.m. sharp. No reply, no acknowledgement. Just the system notification, message opened. I imagined her reading it, tablet in hand, manicured nail hovering mid-scroll. I imagined the moment her stomach dropped, realizing the ground beneath her wasn't as solid as she thought. The thing about people like Vanessa, they only respect power when it disrupts their narrative. And this was disruption in legal form. But I wasn't done. Before Dad passed, he told me something I hadn't understood at the time. He was weak, in and out of morphine dreams, but clear-eyed when he whispered, "You'll need to know where the second lockbox is." I thought it was pain talking. But now I knew better. I pulled up his old planner, yes, he still used one, and flipped to a page marked with a red star. Safe deposit, Larchmont Branch, Backup files. My stomach twisted. That branch was across town, buried in an old neighborhood no one at the company ever visited, which meant it was perfect. I arrived just before closing. The teller scanned my ID, checked the access code, and led me to a side room with a metal box and a single chair. The air was stale, recycled, untouched. Inside, a USB drive, a copy of the amended clause, and a hardbound journal labeled Q Notes, 6.42. I didn't open it there, not yet. I just held it in both hands, because sometimes the heaviest proof of who you are isn't found in a courtroom or a vote tally. It's found in a quiet little room with no windows, where the truth waits for someone willing to carry it back into the light. And I was ready. There's a quiet power in knowing you've pulled the first thread. Not enough to unravel the whole tapestry, not yet, but just enough to watch someone glance down and realize the seam is no longer holding. That's what I felt as I walked into Aurea's tower the next morning, the amended clause and Dad's original journal locked in my bag, the USB drive resting beside my phone like a quiet threat no one had noticed yet. The lobby smelled like citrus cleaner and ambition. Interns rushed past with coffees they didn't drink. Middle managers clutched tablets like they were life rafts. And I moved through it all unseen. No badge, no lanyard, just presence. It was strange how a place you helped build could look through you so easily. But that was the thing about being written out. You get used to walking like a ghost. Upstairs, the executive floor buzzed with the low hum of quarterly nerves. Vanessa always made the earnings call into a spectacle. Charts lit in bold greens and blues. Metrics strung into war cries. Today would be no different, except this time I wasn't there to listen. I was there to interrupt. The boardroom was already filling by the time I stepped through the glass doors. Vanessa sat at the head, all teeth and polish, dressed in that steel gray blazer she wore when she wanted to look unshakable. Ethan sat 2 seats down, staring into the label of his water bottle like it might explain how he'd ended up in her orbit. They saw me, but no one moved. No greeting, no seat offered. Just polite surprise stretched tight across fake smiles. I took the empty chair near the windows, unpacked nothing, said nothing. Vanessa arched an eyebrow. "Lauren, this is a closed executive session." "Then consider this my notice," I said calmly. "Per clause 6.4.2, I'm freezing all executive actions pending review." Silence. The kind that carries weight. The kind that rearranges posture. Thomas Granger entered a beat later, carrying a sealed envelope and the kind of expression lawyers wear when they're about to break news that ruins someone's lunch plans. He handed it to Vanessa without comment. She tore it open, scanned the page, and I saw the moment her shoulders stiffened. Not fear yet, but recognition. "Is this a joke?" she asked, the smile staying on her lips but vanishing from her eyes. "This clause is decades old, symbolic at best." "Legally binding," Granger said, his voice flat. "Executed with updated language and notarization, filed through proper corporate channels." Ethan looked from me to her, then back again. "Wait," he said, like the words hadn't caught up to his brain. "She still counts as a founder." I didn't blink. Apparently, symbolic founders still sign documents that carry weight. I slid the folder across the glossy table. The tab read Clause 6.4.2, revised, signed, notarized. The gold seal caught the recessed lighting like it was daring someone to ignore it. Flash memory surfaced. My first return from parental leave, years ago, scrolling the company's internal org chart on my phone while breastfeeding my daughter in a supply closet, only to find my name missing from the legal list of officers. When I brought it up to Vanessa, she'd smiled and said, "Legal probably trimmed for readability. Nothing personal." It was always personal. They just preferred when it didn't make a scene. Vanessa tapped her stylus against the table, fast and controlled, like a metronome for anxiety. "Lauren? This grandstanding helps no one, especially not our investors. This is a distraction." "I asked for 3 days to bury my father," I replied, voice low and level. "You said family could wait. I'm reminding you that legacy doesn't." Ethan opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. I watched him weigh loyalty against blood and choose silence. Across the table, Elliot, one of the younger board additions brought in during my transition to advisory, scribbled something in his notebook. He was smart enough not to speak yet, but his eyes stayed on me a little longer than the others. Granger remained by the door, neutral as marble. Clause 642 now suspends any binding vote until the review period concludes, he said. Executive initiatives, acquisitions, compensation adjustments, frozen, until further notice. Vanessa's fingers stilled. You're stalling the Capera deal. Then maybe the Capera deal needs to learn the value of decency, I said. The room stayed frozen for a moment longer, as if trying to decide what story it wanted to believe. Finally, I stood. Meeting adjourned, I said, not as a suggestion. Chairs scraped the floor. Some rose, some stayed seated. No one objected. Outside the conference room, the floor was quieter than usual. Maybe because half the assistants were already texting updates to people who hadn't dared attend in person. Maybe because for the first time in a long time, the echo of my footsteps sounded like they belonged. My phone buzzed. One notification, delivery receipt. Your message has been opened by Vanessa Carlisle, 5:12 p.m. yesterday. She'd read it, she just hadn't believed it, until now. Some rooms only remember who used to own them. And some forget the moment someone new walks in holding the keys. The next morning, I stepped into the quarterly board meeting like I had every right to be there, because I did. The room smelled like citrus cleaner and nerves. Sunlight poured in through oversized glass panels, glinting off every polished surface, making even the air feel sharp. Vanessa sat at the head of the table in a steel gray blazer, her stylus tapping a staccato rhythm on her tablet as she breezed through revenue metrics and user acquisition charts. It was the kind of tone-deaf confidence that thrives when no one questions the sound of certainty. I didn't wait for an invitation. I took the empty chair near the windows, placed my folder on the table, and watched her slide flash phrases like aggressive growth and velocity across the screen. Ethan was 2 seats down, still pretending the bottled water in front of him had something enlightening to say. The rest of the board members kept their eyes either on Vanessa or their tablets. No one looked at me directly. Vanessa didn't stop her pitch, didn't even acknowledge my presence until she had to. Lauren, she said flatly, without looking up. If you're here to observe, do it quietly. We're already behind schedule. Her voice was polished, not cold, but empty, like someone who'd practiced their lines in front of a mirror. Thomas Granger stepped into the room at that exact moment, a sealed envelope in hand, and the kind of unreadable expression lawyers wear when they're about to rearrange the power structure of a room. He crossed the space without fanfare, placed the envelope in front of Vanessa, and stepped back. She paused, finally, opening it slowly, as if dragging out the moment could change its meaning. Her eyes moved over the page, and I watched her shoulders tense the way a dam might crack before it leaks. Thomas cleared his throat just enough to take ownership of the moment. Per legal directive, he said, all executive voting privileges are suspended under Clause 6.4.2, effective immediately. Filed and signed by founding stakeholder Lauren Kimble. The room stopped. You could feel it, not silence, but stillness, like breath caught in glass. One junior partner whispered, "What?" like it was a question and an answer. Vanessa didn't move for a second. Then she forced a smile, the kind meant to signal control, but failed to reach her eyes. This is symbolic, she said, voice calm but clipped. Nothing more than a formality being misused. I leaned forward, letting the moment settle like dust. Then I guess symbolic founders still sign legally binding documents, I said, and slid the notarized clause across the table, the gold seal catching the overhead light as it passed through the quiet. Elliot, the youngest board member, blinked and looked to me. She's still a founder, he murmured. I met his eyes directly, held them just long enough. Was never not one. I didn't raise my voice, didn't shift in my seat. I'd learned by now that the more still I stayed, the more clearly people heard me. Across the table, Vanessa's fingers resumed their tapping against the stylus, but this time the rhythm was off. She was recalculating, reframing, reacting. She straightened, trying to reclaim her footing. Lauren, this grandstanding doesn't help anyone, she said, her voice sliding into the practiced tone she used with press and shareholders. Our investors need unity, not infighting. This sends the wrong message. I didn't flinch. I asked for 3 days, I said, voice steady, words deliberate. 3 days to bury the man who built this company and raised both of us. You told me the market couldn't wait. Now I'm telling you it can. That's when she faltered. Not in her words, but in her silence. Ethan finally spoke, his voice strained like it was moving through wet cement. You can't be serious. I turned toward him, not unkindly. I'm as serious as the clause you never bothered to read. Vanessa began to push again, her pitch tightening. You're putting the Kapara deal at risk. This level of instability, I cut in, calm but clear. Then maybe the deal needs to be reevaluated, along with how we define stability. I placed another folder on the table, this one labeled Compensation and Ethics Review, request filed. You made a choice when you ignored my leave request. I'm making one now. The room didn't erupt. It settled. The kind of quiet that happens when no one's sure what's allowed anymore. Elliot lowered his pen. 2 other directors exchanged glances, but said nothing. Granger remained a statue near the door, impartial but unyielding. For a long moment, no one moved. Then I stood, not with drama, just certainty. Meeting adjourned, I said. Not a question, a decision. I didn't look back as I left, but I caught my reflection in the glass walls, taller than I remembered. Not lighter, just more solid. Behind me, the boardroom filled with the low hum of fallout, half-formed arguments, and urgent whispers about clauses in optics and damage control. But I didn't need to hear it, I already knew. The balance had shifted. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't asking for space. I was claiming it. Some battles start with declarations. Others start with silence and a thumb drive. After freezing the board and walking out of that conference room, I knew what would come next. Denial, deflection, a curated narrative designed to make me look unstable, emotional, disruptive. But what they didn't know, what they never imagined, was that my father hadn't just left behind a clause. He'd left behind a trail, a blueprint. And I knew exactly who could help me read it. Jenna Ortiz answered my text within 2 minutes. No emojis, no hesitation. Just a time and a location, the sub-level print server room, Building C, 4:15 p.m. Jenna had been one of Aureus's brightest DevOps engineers before Vanessa restructured the backend team and moved her to what amounted to IT exile. Her real sin wasn't performance, it was loyalty. She'd worked late nights with my father in the old days, running scripts side by side while the rest of the office slept. She never forgot who gave her a shot. Neither did I. When I slipped into the dimly lit server room later that day, Jenna was already waiting. Laptop open, hoodie sleeves shoved to her elbows. The air smelled like toner, dust, and long-kept secrets. She didn't ask what I needed. She just said, "You're lucky your dad never revoked his admin token." They tucked it under an equipment lease shell. Sloppy. I exhaled slowly. Can you pull anything that smells off? Bonuses? Travel? Anything nested inside innocuous tags? She nodded. Give me 10. While lines of code danced across her screen, I paced. The quiet hum of network routers filled the space, a low background frequency like the building's heartbeat. They made it look clean, I murmured, like the company just evolved without me. But something always felt engineered. Jenna didn't look up. Because it was. They restructured you out like code depreciation. You didn't break. They rewrote you. 10 minutes later, she spun the screen toward me. Found 3 big anomalies, all buried inside a travel reimbursement file with HR flags disabled. Watch this. She highlighted the rows one by one. The first, a series of first-class flights listed under advisory networking. Destinations included Florence, Jackson Hole, and St. Bart's. The totals hit 2.6 million across 4 fiscal quarters. The names attached? No actual advisors, just initials. The second, 7.8 million in consulting fees, paid to a firm called Hartley Group Global, a Delaware-based shell company with no public-facing employees, except one, Richard Hartley, Vanessa's cousin. And the third, thousands in corporate Amex charges for designer handbags and luxury wine labeled Team Development. I stared at the numbers. At first, they didn't make me angry. They made me tired. Tired of how clean corruption looks in a spreadsheet. Tired of how easily ethics become line items in people like Vanessa's world. Then slowly, the tiredness boiled into something sharper. Download everything to a secure drive, I said. Jenna nodded and reached into her backpack. producing a black USB drive already pre-formatted for stealth. "We're off-grid here, no metadata, no audit trail, everything's time-stamped, mirrored, encrypted." She plugged it in, and the files began to transfer, one cold number at a time. While the progress bar crawled forward, she opened another folder marked Personnel Flags. "Thought you might want to see this too." She scrolled down past generic notations and paused near the bottom. A line stood out in red. "Employee, L. Kimble, leave request. Denied reason, insubordination date, JO 3.14, category, administrative violation." I stared at it, once, then again. My fingers curled slowly around the edge of the desk. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't stormed out. I'd asked to bury my father, and they wrote it down as disobedience. Jenna slid a red pen across the table. "I figured you'd want to mark it." I took it without a word and circled the phrase. Not fast, not furious. Just slow, deliberate ink. One stroke at a time until the paper bled. "We have enough to trigger an internal audit, even a forensic referral," Jenna said, watching me carefully. I shook my head. "Not yet. First, we let their own system digest it. Then we flip the mirror." I compressed the most damning files into a single PDF, scrubbed identifying markers, and renamed the document, Ethics Report Alpha.pdf. Then I logged into the company's anonymous integrity portal. Ironically, a tool Vanessa had championed for transparency optics, and attached the report. My cursor hovered over the submit button. "You ready to pull the pin?" Jenna asked. "I'm not pulling anything," I said. "I'm just letting gravity do its job." I clicked. The screen blinked. Confirmation, submission received. "Thank you for supporting a culture of integrity." The irony almost made me laugh. We exited separately. I took the main stairwell. Jenna slipped through the service corridor. I walked back to my desk with a calm so still it felt unnatural. Sat. Composed a short memo to HR, per audit protocol. Please confirm receipt of materials submitted via compliance channel at 4:47 p.m. It was dry, unemotional, perfect. Then for the first time all week, I opened my father's old journal to the section he'd bookmarked with a grocery receipt. Below it, in his neat slanted script, he'd written, "The smallest slip can sink the largest ship." I tapped my fingers against the page. No reply from HR yet. No alarms, no whispers. But something had shifted. And the ship? It had just begun to lean. The storm didn't come with thunder, it came with timestamps. That night, while the city pressed into its evening hush and the lights of Aria's tower blinked against a rainy skyline, I sat at my kitchen counter with a mug of chamomile and watched the system digest the truth. I refreshed the audit portal like someone checking for an arriving flight. Except this wasn't about travel, it was about trajectory. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting to land. I was watching someone else start to fall. The PDF I'd submitted, Ethics Report Alpha, hit the internal network queue at 4:47 p.m. By 7:02, it had been routed to the compliance server. At 7:14, it pinged an external legal counsel assigned to high-priority escalations. By 8:53, it was flagged level red for financial risk and reputational exposure. No one had replied to my memo yet. But silence didn't mean nothing was happening. In systems like this, silence meant movement. By the time I woke the next morning, the news ticker at the bottom of a muted CNBC segment whispered what I already knew. Prominent tech firm under internal ethics review. Sources say executive conduct in question. The anchor sipped her coffee like she didn't realize the headline had a heartbeat. Mine. My phone buzzed with the first text at 8:12. It came from an old contact in HR I hadn't heard from since Vanessa reassigned me without discussion. The message was short. "People are whispering your name like it's classified." I stared at it for a second, then set my phone face down on the counter. I didn't need to reply. 5 minutes later, a second text followed. Vanessa just walked into legal demanding to know who leaked the audit. She's fuming. That made me smile. Not out of spite, but because it meant the game board was finally visible to everyone in the room. No more quiet sidelining. No more tidy erasures. This time, the narrative had teeth. I changed out of my sweatshirt and jeans into a dark blazer and structured slacks. No bright colors, no softness. Not today. I pulled my hair back, left my jewelry behind, and drove to headquarters with the kind of calm that comes when you already know what's on the other side of the curtain. Inside Aureus Tower, the energy had shifted. Not openly, but perceptibly. The lobby had a hum to it, a low murmur of conversations that trailed off whenever anyone in a blazer walked by. At the cafe line, a junior dev held his phone up to a colleague, showing something on the screen. When our eyes met, he straightened like he'd been caught looking at something sacred. I gave him a nod, not because I wanted to be recognized, but because I needed to be seen. Upstairs, the executive floor buzzed like a disturbed beehive. The hallway outside the boardroom was no longer silent. I could hear the voices through the half-closed glass, strained, clipped, slightly panicked. Phrases like unauthorized equity flow, shell routing, and external counsel wants a preliminary response within the hour floated through like smoke from a controlled burn. Then Vanessa's voice cut through it all like polished steel. Find out who planted this fiction before noon. Fiction, a convenient word for when facts turn feral. I didn't go to the boardroom, I bypassed it, turning instead into the compliance wing, where a red status light blinked above the entry keypad. Inside, 3 compliance officers huddled around a workstation, voices low. When I entered, one of them, Clara, mid-30s, steady eyes behind reading glasses, looked up and visibly exhaled. "Miss Kimble," she said. "We weren't sure if we should loop you in." "You are now," I said. "Status?" She turned the monitor. "Initial report confirmed receipt. Legal routed it to forensic review before Vanessa could pull it. Board called an emergency session for 10. They've already frozen the advisory travel fund." She hesitated. "That's just the start," I nodded. "Keep tracing the shell accounts. Hartley Group is Vanessa's cousin. Check the routing numbers, likely offshore." Clara's eyebrows rose, but she didn't argue. "Understood." At 9:40, my phone buzzed with a silent alert. Shareholder access update. Compliance audit escalated. Trigger, governance clause, 6.4.2. It was happening, faster than I'd expected. But systems, like people, react differently when stress hits something already cracked. Through the glass, I watched Vanessa pace inside the boardroom. She wasn't wearing her steel blazer today. She'd switched to ivory, but it didn't soften her. Her mouth was tight. Ethan followed her, speaking low, trying to steer. She waved him off with a flick of her hand. Power doesn't like being explained to. At 10:00 sharp, the board filed into a smaller conference room on the compliance level for a review briefing. I didn't sit at the head. I didn't need to. I took a seat halfway down the table, visible, unignorable. The first slide read, "Ethics flag, bereavement leave denial, L. Kimble, insubordination notation, 0314. The words glowed across the screen like a stain. Clara read from the report, voice even, expression neutral. Employee requested 3 days of bereavement leave for the death of Richard Kimble, company founder. Request denied. HR notation flagged as insubordination, unavailable during acquisition prep." The room stayed silent. Even the HVAC seemed to pause. An older board member leaned forward. "Is this how we treat our founding family?" Another muttered, almost to himself, "We're going to lose investors over this." Vanessa opened her mouth. "It was an HR protocol, poor timing, that's all." Clara turned to the next slide. Unauthorized bonuses. Hartley Group Global, 7.8%. No one spoke. I didn't gloat. I didn't lean forward. I let the numbers speak. Because sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one backed by receipts. And mine had just gone public. Some battles are won in courtrooms. Others are won in small sealed offices where no one raises their voice and truth arrives by courier. The moment the numbers hit the projector, 7.8 million in consulting fees, routed through Vanessa's cousin's shell company, was the moment the room changed temperature. Not by degrees, but by posture. Shoulders lowered, eyes shifted. The board stopped seeing me as the disruptive little sister and started seeing me as the person holding the fire alarm. After the meeting adjourned, directors filed out like people leaving a scene they weren't sure they had permission to understand. I didn't follow them. I stayed behind in the empty room and stared at the last slide still glowing on the screen. Unauthorized expenditures, internal review pending. The words were plain, cold, but I knew what they meant. They were the first fracture in a wall that had once seemed unmovable. By noon, I was back in my apartment, rain tapping lightly against the windows, like it was trying to knock politely. My phone buzzed. A call from Marcus Bell, my father's longtime legal counsel. I answered on the first ring. "Lauren," he said without greeting, "check your inbox. Your father left one more thing." He anticipated this phase too. The email came with a scanned document and an encrypted PDF attached. At the top of the scan, stock reallocation, effective upon evidence of ethical contravention. Signed, Richard Kimble, dated 16 months ago. One line in bold, transfer of controlling interest from Family Trust A, administered by Vanessa Carlisle, to Family Trust B, administered by Lauren Kimble. Trigger, documented breach of ethical standards by an active officer. The document was clean, notarized, witnessed, sealed. I stared at it, the weight of it sinking slowly into my chest, like a heartbeat slowing down after a sprint. My father hadn't just left me a clause, he'd left me a door, and behind that door, he left the rest of the house. I didn't cry, I didn't cheer. I printed the document, placed it into a slim folder, and walked it to the courthouse annex the next morning. The clerk reviewed it, stamped it, filed it. No confetti, no music, just a dull clack of rubber on paper and a polite, "Congratulations, ma'am." When I left, the air felt lighter, not because the burden was gone, but because it was finally mine to carry. Back at Aureus, things had shifted. The usual hush of the executive floor had been replaced with an anxious current, too quiet to be called chaos, too tense to be called calm. People weren't making eye contact. HR walked in clusters. Middle managers had stopped saying, "Good morning." Everyone was bracing for impact. They just didn't know where it would land. That afternoon, I stepped onto the top floor 10 minutes before the board's emergency governance session. I wore no badge, no title. But when the receptionist handed me a visitor's pass, her hand shook slightly, and she didn't meet my eyes. The name tag said guest, but we both knew better. Through the frosted glass, I saw Vanessa conferring with Ethan and 2 other board loyalists. Her mouth moved fast, her expression sharp with damage control. The moment she spotted me approaching, her spine straightened like a ruler snapping back into place. "Thank you all for being here," she said, turning toward the room. "We'll address rumors and restore confidence." I didn't speak, not yet. I walked to the table, set the sealed folder down in front of the chair I used to occupy, and opened it slowly. "This document affects the agenda order," I said simply. Vanessa's smile held, but her hands betrayed her. One clenched slightly as she reached for the paper. Her eyes scanned the top line, then widened just slightly. She knew that handwriting. And she knew the seal was real. Marcus stood quietly in the corner, as agreed. He nodded once, subtle. "This reallocation meets the clause requirements," he confirmed. "Ethical breach is documented. Transfer is active. Control now lies with Miss Kimble." Ethan leaned back, visibly pale. Vanessa tried to speak. This is a misapplication. My administration of Trust A is protected." I cut her off, not unkindly. "You called my request for 3 days to bury my father in subordination. That meets the trigger. The audit meets the clause. My father's signature meets the law." One of the directors, the same one who'd looked sick during the compliance briefing, leaned forward. "Do we need to vote?" Halverson, the senior board chair, shook his head. "Not on ownership. The transfer is notarized. We'll schedule formal acknowledgement for next week. Procedural only." Vanessa stood, hands gripping the edge of the table. "You're jeopardizing everything," she snapped. "The Capera acquisition, our quarterly momentum, the stability we've built." I looked at her. Not with venom, with finality. "Stability that relies on silence," I said, "was never stable. This isn't upheaval, it's correction." The room held still. No one disagreed, because the room knew. And so did she. As people gathered their notes and began to file out, Vanessa lingered. Her gaze flicked from me to the folder and back again. She wanted to fight. I could feel it coiled in her shoulders, but the numbers, the law, and the seal were no longer hers to twist. "You can't erase me," she said, low, "just for me." "I'm not here to erase anyone," I replied. "I'm here to restore what should have never been stolen." And this time, when I took the head seat, I didn't wait for someone to offer it. I sat, and I began. Some storms don't come from the sky. They rise from the floorboards, slow, steady, inevitable. The day after the control transfer was officially acknowledged, Aurea's tower felt like a building holding its breath. The fluorescent lights buzzed slightly louder. Conversations softened mid-sentence. I walked the halls like I belonged there, because now, legally and unambiguously, I did. But this next part wasn't about me taking up space. It was about showing everyone why I still deserved it. Friday morning, emergency board session. The room wasn't full yet, but the tension was. Directors trickled in quietly, holding coffee cups like shields. No one asked about the weather. Vanessa arrived 5 minutes late. Not late enough to be reckless, but enough to signal she was still performing authority. Her hair was perfect. Her jaw was set. But her walk had lost its usual glide. She sat across from me without greeting and opened her tablet like she meant to win a war using formatting. I didn't speak at first. Let the silence stretch. Let the discomfort settle. Then I reached for the folder beside me, flipped it open, and projected the first slide. Unauthorized expenditures. Executive review summary. The numbers were precise, irrefutable. First-class travel under fake departments. Luxury goods labeled as team development. Consultant payouts to shell corporations with familial ties. I looked up at the table. This is not a rumor. This is a pattern. Elliot shifted in his seat. Halverson frowned at the spreadsheet like it was written in another language. Vanessa didn't flinch. This is cherry-picked data, she said smoothly. Pulled out of context by someone with an emotional stake. You're framing paperwork as corruption. That's not leadership. I let her speak. Let her play the part. Then I clicked to the next slide. Internal verification. Forensic accounting review. The Aureus auditors had been fast once the portal lit up red. Their seal was on the report. Their names on the summary. All of it mirrored. Confirmed. Clean. Vanessa opened her mouth, but Halverson raised a hand. Enough, he said. The numbers speak. The board will move to suspend pending investigation. Vanessa stood. On what grounds? I answered without raising my voice. On the grounds that trust isn't a bonus. It's a foundation. And right now, that foundation is rotting. The vote was quick. 14 for suspension, 2 abstentions, none opposed. Vanessa froze. Not visibly, not dramatically, just long enough to notice that no one rushed to defend her. Ethan wouldn't meet her eyes. Clara from compliance stood quietly near the door, ready. She knew the choreography. Security was already on standby. Vanessa didn't speak as they approached. She closed her tablet with controlled force and slid it into her bag. You'll regret this, she said softly, looking at no one in particular. You're making enemies in every direction. I stood too, calm, measured. You made them first. I'm just turning on the lights. She left the room without slamming the door. Her footsteps echoed down the corridor. 1, 2, 3. And then the silence returned. Not fearful silence, resolute silence. The kind that fills a room after something has finally broken. The meeting ended without further resistance. The directors shuffled out, some with questions, others with new respect they didn't yet know how to express. I stayed behind again. Let the echoes of the moment breathe a little longer. An hour later, I walked past what used to be Vanessa's corner office. The nameplate was already gone. 2 interns boxed her belongings under quiet supervision. The scent of grapefruit diffuser still lingered in the air, sharp, artificial, fading. On her desk was a silver frame. A photo of my father shaking Vanessa's hand the day she was appointed COO. He looked proud, hopeful. I stared at it for a long second. Then I turned the frame face down, gently, like closing a book that ended wrong. That afternoon, as I returned to my own workspace, temporarily restored but still mostly symbolic, my desk phone rang. It hadn't rung in weeks. I stared at it like it was a trick, then picked it up. Lauren, a voice said, strained, unfamiliar. You don't know me, but I have information about the Norland deal. Vanessa altered the valuation model 6 months ago. It's going to come back to you if you don't see what she hid. My fingers tightened on the receiver. She filed in Fairfax Circuit Court an hour ago, the voice continued. Wrongful termination. She's contesting the trust. Says your father was coerced in his final months. The words landed like ice against my spine, but not fear, strategy. I hung up without replying. logged into the docket. It was true, she'd filed. She wasn't done, but neither was I. Because in this next battle, the proof didn't live in spreadsheets. It lived in something far older. And my father had left it behind, in his handwriting, with his seal, waiting to be opened. Some legacies are written in ink, others are encoded in foresight. That night, after the call about Vanessa's court filing and the threat buried beneath her lawsuit, I sat alone in the apartment. Lights low, Dad's leather journal open on the table like a trusted witness. Outside, the city swam in reflected rain. Inside, the weight of every decision, every document, every silence pressed against my chest like a second spine. She was trying to unravel everything. My standing, the trust transfer, even his final signature. She wasn't just coming for me, she was coming for his memory. My phone buzzed at 9:23. Marcus again. This time, he didn't wait for pleasantries. "Your father prepared for this," he said. "Come downtown, now." His office was quiet, lamplight stretching shadows across antique wood and aged carpet. He motioned me inside without a word and produced a slim ivory envelope sealed with scarlet wax. Per his will, this was to be opened only if the trust was contested, he said. He called it his final counterbalance. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me did. I broke the seal, unfolded the single page. His handwriting curved across it, strong, certain, not like a man near death, like a man done being quiet. "Lauren, if you're reading this, it means she turned the company into a weapon. You'll be tempted to fight her anger with fire. Don't. Fight with dignity. Fight with records. You carry the story forward. Protect it." Beneath the note was a notarized addendum to the trust, short, surgical, devastating in its precision. "Any heir who contests the terms of the trust in bad faith shall forfeit all remaining equity and rights to residual disbursement." Dated, signed, witnessed. My father hadn't just locked the door, he'd sealed the escape routes. I looked at Marcus. "Can we counterfile immediately?" He nodded. "And we will. Breach of fiduciary duty, hostile workplace. Plus the penalty clause. She'll lose everything." I left the building feeling nothing like victorious. This wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I came from and making sure no one rewrote him to fit their narrative. The next morning, my comms team pushed a single message to every employee inbox. Simple, unapologetic. I never sought a fight, but grief is not insubordination. It's not weakness. It's not cause for dismissal. It's human. And I will defend the legacy of those who built this company, not just for their name, but for everyone who ever built it alongside them. Responses flooded in within minutes. Thumbs up emojis, quiet thank yous. One bold reply from a software architect I'd mentored years ago. About time someone said it. The letter leaked externally, of course. By noon, CNBC was calling it transparent leadership in a time of internal upheaval. I didn't correct them. Let them call it what they wanted. I wasn't playing for headlines. I was cleaning up a history they'd tried to delete. That afternoon, Jenna sent me a message marked S15. Attached were 3 spreadsheets she'd pulled during her last deep dive. Hidden among them, a $2.4 million engagement fee, paid to a contractor who was, on LinkedIn, still listed as Vanessa's college roommate. The contract hadn't even been scrubbed properly. It still listed Vanessa's assistant as the document witness. I scheduled an emergency board session for the next morning. No preamble, no leaks, just a quiet notice on everyone's calendar titled Governance Brief, Forensic Addendum. They came in slower this time. Not hesitant, but careful. Vanessa's chair remained empty, her name now scrubbed from the seating order. I stood at the screen and projected the figures, one column at a time, one name at a time. Designer wine under morale recovery, 6-figure consulting to a known associate, charges routed through client research that led to nothing but spa receipts. The room reacted in degrees, first disbelief, then disgust. Halverson's voice broke the silence. "I move we refer this to legal for criminal review." The vote was unanimous. No one looked surprised, just tired, cleansed. As if rehearsed, the process server walked in exactly 4 minutes later. "Ms. Vanessa Carlyle?" he asked the room. Everyone knew. The man held out a thick envelope. Subpoena, indictment, finality. The moment, of course, was caught on camera by someone from finance. The clip made it to social media within an hour, trending under Dalki Hart's Luxgarn leak. Vanessa's lawyer tried spinning it as sabotage. HR tried floating a narrative of structural miscommunication. No one bought it. The story had a protagonist now. And this time, it wasn't her. That night, long after the building had emptied, I returned to the executive floor. No lights, just the hum of servers and a breeze that whispered through the cracked window, like the breath of something finally let go. On the desk, I laid Dad's letter beside the audit folder, his handwriting, my signature, our names, side by side. Outside, the city kept pulsing, fast, demanding, relentless. But in here, something sacred had returned. And for the first time in a very long time, it didn't feel like I was holding the company together by memory alone. It felt like I was building something new. Some victories are loud, press conferences, ticker bumps, celebratory dinners with too many courses and not enough meaning. But others arrive soft, almost unnoticed, like the sound of paper sliding into a drawer or soil giving way beneath a boot. In the weeks following Vanessa's suspension and the board's vote to file a formal criminal referral, the company stabilized. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear, and clarity, it turns out, doesn't crave applause. It craves direction. The day I received the final approval confirming my full controlling interest in Aureus, I didn't walk into the executive suite. I drove south, past the city skyline, past the warehouses and overpasses, into the part of town most of our engineers couldn't even point to on a map. The 5-acre lot sat behind a rusted gate marked "No Trespassing," a half-forgotten patch of scrubland where my father's first warehouse once stood. It had been gone for years, demolished for potential development that never came. Now it was just dirt, wind, and memory. I parked, stepped out of the car, and stood at the edge of it all. The air smelled like dry grass and old nails. In the far corner, a single oak tree leaned sideways, like it had been growing in defiance. This was the place he started from. Before the board meetings, before IPOs and burn rates and quarterly projections. Just a man, a soldering gun, and a belief that something built with care could outlast the noise. That belief needed a home again. By the time I met with the City Planning Commission 2 days later, I knew exactly what I wanted. Not a tech campus, I told the room. No towers, no parking garages. I want a public garden. They blinked at me like I'd misread the forms. Green space, I clarified. Native flora, a pathway through the center, shaded benches, free Wi-Fi if it helps, but no branding, no logos, just breathing room. One council member asked, "Is this for PR?" I looked her in the eye. No, it's for the people who never had a quiet place to sit, including my father. Permits moved faster than expected. Public land donations don't raise red tape the way new buildings do. I pulled funding from the executive discretionary budget, untouched since Vanessa froze bonuses during the last acquisition cycle. The irony made me smile. Jenna helped set up the project ledger. Clara reviewed compliance for transparency. Elliot even volunteered to draft the press release, but I told him not yet. This wasn't about attention. Not yet. 3 months later, construction began. The fencing went up first, then the soil treatment crews arrived. Local landscapers designed paths that curved, not cut. Deliberate lines meant to slow people down. We planted magnolias along the east border, dogwoods by the walkways, and placed a curved stone wall at the entrance. It held a bronze plaque etched with words I chose carefully. For the builders, the forgotten, the kind-hearted. In memory of Richard Kimble and the daughter he finally saw. When the press got hold of it, they called it an act of restoration and a healing gesture from a fractured company. Let them say what they want. I didn't build it for headlines. I built it because legacy should live somewhere other than litigation and meeting rooms. At the ribbon cutting, the board showed up in pressed suits and quiet humility. Ethan stood at the back, hands in his pockets, eyes damp. He hadn't spoken to me since the day Vanessa left. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, but he came. That was enough, for now. One reporter asked if the garden had been part of my strategy to rebrand. I told her it wasn't a strategy, it was a homecoming. In the weeks that followed, the garden filled slowly, students with sketchbooks, retired engineers eating their lunch on curved benches, single moms reading while their toddlers rolled in leaves. I came by most Saturdays, not as the CEO, just as someone whose name had almost been erased. I walked the trails barefoot once, just to feel the soil under my feet, just to remember that this all started with something real, something quiet, something small. That fall, the city honored the space with a preservation award. We didn't host a ceremony, we just updated the website and added a QR code to the plaque for people who wanted to read about Dad. His bio was short, but it ended with a line he once scribbled on a napkin during a late-night debugging session. Good code should be clean, good people should be cleaner. And that was the point. I didn't want a monument, I wanted a message. I didn't want revenge, I wanted roots. Not all endings announce themselves. Some just arrive, unfolded gently in the stillness after the noise, like fog lifting from a field you didn't realize you were standing in. It was a crisp Saturday in October when I knew the story had closed. Not with a bang, not with a court verdict or headline, but with a small hand tucked inside mine and a shoebox balanced between his arms. Evan, 8 years old, all elbows and questions, stood beside me at the cemetery, carefully cradling the model garden we'd built together over the last few weekends. Miniature benches, tiny magnolia trees, a matchstick wall with a plaque we'd made from a foil gum wrapper. He was proud of it, the way kids are proud of something they made with their whole heart and 2 sticky fingers. He crouched beside the headstone and placed it in the grass, adjusting the trees like a landscaper with a master plan. "Grandpa would have liked it," he said, matter-of-factly. I smiled and traced the engraving on the smooth granite. Richard Kimble, builder, father, quiet revolutionary. The stone was cool against my fingertips, but it didn't feel distant. It felt steady, present. "He does like it," I said quietly. "And I think he finally found peace." Evan slipped his hand into mine again. We stood there for a while, just breathing. After we left the cemetery, we stopped at the garden. He ran ahead, pointing to the corner where the dogwoods were beginning to change color. I watched him weave through the curved path with the ease of someone who knew where he belonged. That's what I wanted. For him, for me, for anyone who'd ever been told they weren't the right shape to fit into power. A place to exhale. The weeks passed. Shareholder meetings resumed. Product launches were approved. HR stabilized. But I moved differently now. Less out of defense, more out of purpose. Clara took over as Chief Compliance Officer. Jenna joined our security architecture team. Elliot stayed on the board and quietly reshaped hiring protocols to value ethics alongside innovation. And Ethan? He came by the garden one morning without warning. We walked the loop in silence. He said he was sorry. I didn't say it was okay, but I said I knew. That was enough. Vanessa, meanwhile, was indicted on multiple counts: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, obstruction. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. Her attorney tried to shift blame. She tried to soften her tone. But the documents spoke louder. The trust clause held. She lost her shares, her right to serve on any corporate board, her leverage. The system she'd weaponized turned on her, not because I pushed, but because it had been rigged so tightly it collapsed under its own lies. She sent 2 emails. The first was justification. The second was desperation. I archived both without opening them, because sometimes the cleanest reply is silence. That winter, I received a letter from the estate court, a formal acknowledgement of the trust's resolution, alongside a notarized copy of Dad's final amendment. At the bottom, beneath the legal formalities, someone had attached a scanned copy of a handwritten note. I recognized the slanted script instantly. If I ever chose to walk away, I'd keep just one thing: the land where we began. Let Lauren choose what grows there, she'll know. And I did. Because that space, that garden, was never about rewriting history. It was about grounding it. Reminding everyone that before the patents, before the glossy funding rounds, before the egos and the PowerPoints, there was a man in a warehouse who believed good ideas deserve good hands. And that people, especially those overlooked, build more than code. They build culture. One afternoon in January, I sat in the garden office alone, the windows fogged with breath and winter. I opened Dad's journal to a page where he'd taped a faded grocery receipt. On the back, in ink beginning to fade, he'd written, "A system that forgets where it started doesn't deserve to lead where it's going." That line stayed with me. because I almost let them erase me. Almost. But I didn't disappear. I recalibrated, reclaimed, rebuilt. And what I salvaged wasn't just equity or a title. It was the quiet certainty of my own worth. The understanding that value doesn't need volume. That legacy, when rooted right, doesn't tremble. Evan once asked me if I missed the way things used to be. I told him no. Because sometimes the greatest thing you can ever build isn't a company. It's the space to become whole again. And I had finally done that. Brick by brick, quietly, permanently.